Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. This is Sarah Smith on the Sarah Speaks podcast, coming to you from the lovely Cornwall Park, where we have a chemical soup covering our skies, and you can see also that the grass is starting to dry out, and we're only just at the very start of summer. This morning we had blue skies, and then we saw the chemicals fanning out as they do in their kind of wavy configuration, which is very typical for geoengineering operations. So, that aside, I thought I would just have a little bit of a catch up about the week and how it's gone. The weekend primarily, because we did have the Beyond Politics event with Mark Thompson, and also supported by the Mothers Who Stand for Freedom. And it was a very successful event. We had about 60 to 70 people, and it was an eclectic mix of people from all walks of life, all races, all ages, and it was good to see people representing lots of different groups. So, people from NZLM, people from Haka the Beehive, people from the sovereignty movement, people from different organisations who are all trying to work towards making New Zealand a better place. So the format was to have a few presenters, and then the initial thought was to break away into smaller groups and do some brainstorming about strategic planning. But in the end we were quite pressed for time, and we put it to a vote, and the majority of people actually wanted to just keep going with presentations. So we had Shelley Richardson talk about common law. We had Calvin Alp also talk about common law and what's happening down in the Able Tasman. And then we had Mark Thompson talk a little bit about the elections, and also in America what's happening with the elections. And yours truly gave a wee presentation on child abuse, satanic ritual abuse. I think that was everybody. So it was quite a good event, just in the sense that people just are hungry for the truth, and they're hungry for information, and they're actually really wanting to all be in the same room together and just be around like-minded people. So depending on which viewpoint you come from, I suppose, you might, nobody probably on this channel listening, watching my stuff, but perhaps people who only tend to watch mainstream media, they probably see the world having a global reset, a la the World Economic Forum and Klaus Schwab. But people like myself are hoping that in fact we are having a global reset, which is more akin to a global awakening. So it has been prophesied that we are in the 30 years of revelations, and that's the great thing about the internet, because the truth is there if you want to know it. And that brings me to the main purpose of me wanting to make this little summary video podcast today, because as most of you know, mainstream media is more or less non-existent in this country, and they are just a propaganda wing for the globalists and the people with certain agendas. And I always find it fascinating how, rather than actually doing any research, these people just parrot the talking points from their colleagues either within New Zealand or overseas. So I had the pleasure of talking to David Farrier just before the event started on Saturday, and I was standing outside welcoming people in, and David Farrier bulls on up, doesn't introduce himself, no light pleasantries or introductions or anything like that, straight into trying to get into the event, and lo and behold, he's already recording. No requests to record our conversation, just shoves the microphone straight in our face pretty much, which was not a good start from my point of view. I think there's a lot to be said for manners, there's a lot to be said for pleasantries, and there's a lot to be said for trying to build a rapport with somebody. And David Farrier demonstrated through his actions that he was in fact not willing to build rapport. He came with a very arrogant, smug attitude, and that got my back up, understandably. And I was on the spot a little bit. I was taken aback. I actually naively probably didn't think that he would, well, it didn't cross my mind that he would turn up at all, but I probably naively thought that I just didn't think anyone would turn up. I mean, I did think maybe Josie Adams would turn up in light of the fact that she had, the day before, written an incredibly defamatory piece on the Mothers Who Stand for Freedom and the whole event, linking it to so-called terrorist organisation QAnon in the States, and linking in Damien Dement as if he was a white supremacist. And a danger. I mean, Damien's had hit pieces done on him before, but I can't imagine it ever gets any easier. And it was completely unfounded. Completely slanderous. And completely unprofessional. So, that was Josie Adams from the spin-off. And if you look at David Farrier's profile on the spin-off, he's actually listed as an investigative journalist. And he also runs a online blog now called Webworm, where he specialises in hunting out conspiracy theory groups and topics, and basically just taking the mickey, more or less, and just doing, the usual hit piece. So, of course, my alarm bells were going off when he arrived, and his whole demeanour and attitude didn't help, and there was no way, in my mind, that he was actually coming to do a fair and balanced piece. he did ask to be allowed in to record, to which I said no. And then he also did try and get in without his recording equipment, to which I also pretty much said no. Now, some people may disagree with my decision and say, well, what about freedom of speech and freedom to attend a public event? And that's all well and good, but if you're purely going to make up lies about people and ruin people's lives, because this guy doxes people. We're not talking about someone who just wants to learn and wants to genuinely know things. He actually is, he's an activist, more or less. He's actually now actively requesting that the Auckland City Council doesn't allow groups like Mothers for Freedom to rent their space to hold their events. So that's censorship, and that is cancel culture at its finest. So why would I
No more of that now.
want somebody attending who's actually coming with the intention to smear, defame and cancel? And yes, I understand it's important for the opposition to hear our arguments and hear our side. Well, why don't we set up a debate then? David Farrier, why don't you come and debate our side? Why don't you come and debate about satanic ritual abuse? Why don't you come and debate about the truth about COVID, the truth about the vaccines, the truth about the American election, which, let's look at how mainstream media partakes in a conspiracy theory, which that's all it is, because there's no evidence that Trump has actually lost the election yet. It's all media hearsay, hasn't been called yet. There is evidence of fraud coming out, and the mainstream media clings on to a conspiracy theory that Biden has won. The other conspiracy theory that they perpetrated for years and years and years was that there was Russian collusion. That Trump was colluding with the Russians. Now, that was proven to be based in no evidence. There was no evidence ever brought to the table. Now, that was a conspiracy theory. But we'll just ignore that. That's just a non-issue. It's just all these other people that partake in conspiracy theories. So, Farrier's main argument for being allowed in was that he just wanted to learn. So I said, okay, what do you know about this event? And what do you know about the topics that are being discussed here? And he said, before the cameras were rolling, he said he didn't know anything and all he had done was read the flyer. And I'm thinking to myself, come on, mate. Do you think I just came down in the last shower? You call yourself an investigative journalist, and yet you turn up at an event purely based on a flyer? You, David Farrier, the great David Farrier, one of New Zealand's top investigative journalists? Give me a break. This was clearly going to be a hit piece. This was clearly going to be a smear campaign against the truth, because that's ultimately what it is. It's not about me personally. It's not about the Mothers Who Stand for Freedom. It's not about these groups. It's about the truth, because this is a war on truth. And the more these people turn up without any genuine interest and actually hearing the arguments or hearing our science, because that was funny too. He said, I'm a skeptic and I tend to take more a scientific angle. It's like, okay then, David, have you even talked to COVID Plan B team? Have you talked to Dr. Simon Thornley? No, you haven't. Why not go back there and start there? Because, I'll tell you why. You've clearly got a particular angle that you're running, and that was my point, and I did kind of labour it a little bit, yes, I admit it. But my point was that journalists always have an angle before they go out to a story. More often than not, because more often than not they have an editor, or if it's for television, a producer, or an executive producer, when it gets down to the nitty gritty, who is actually calling the shots. And at the end of the day, they don't really have an individual choice about what stories they write. Now, I don't know, I mean, presumably, if it's his blog, he theoretically would have complete editorial say over what gets written on his blog. I don't know who funds his blog. I haven't looked into it very deeply. But he's definitely a mainstream journalist. He's come through the mainstream ranks of journalism. So he's definitely, part of the postage stamp consensus, and anything outside of that gets labelled a conspiracy theory. It's the same as Josie Adams. Rather than actually do any fact checking or provide any evidence, they just make things up. We live in an age now where the mainstream media is just making things up and trying to palm it off as serious journalism. So that was interesting, and yes, I did get my back up a little bit, and I wasn't expecting it, but I didn't want to just kowtow to him either. I wanted to stand my ground, and I actually flipped it. So I don't know why I didn't think of it sooner, but it took me a little while to think of getting my phone out to film him. So the first half of our interaction wasn't filmed, unfortunately. He's got it all recorded. But halfway through I thought, right, I'm going to flip the script on him, and I'm going to interview him. So I started interviewing him, and of course, on reflection, you can always do things a bit differently or a bit better. But hey, I'm not a journalist. I'm just a concerned citizen who is deeply, deeply worried about this country, and not only with politics and a political direction, but also with the media. So all I can do is ask questions when I get the opportunity to. All I can do is talk to interesting people when I can. And I'm a very inquisitive person by nature, always have been, and so long as I can, I will continue to ask questions, and I will continue to present my findings to the people of New Zealand, because you deserve it. You deserve the truth, and you deserve to see who these mainstream mouthpieces are, and you deserve to see what utter rubbish they talk, and you also deserve to see their lack of integrity. And as far as I'm concerned, David Farrier and Josie Adams have no integrity. David Farrier was lying through his teeth, claiming at first that, he knew nothing about these topics. Then you go look at his blog and he's written all about them. And he just links them to QAnon, and links them to groups that are alleged terrorist organisations. And he allegedly thinks that there's a lot of mistruth around satanic ritual abuse and child abuse. So he doesn't want to understand the arguments. He's just got his agenda, and that's what he's pushing. So yeah, that was interesting. He left a little bit miffed that he was denied access to our event. And he did ask me for an interview, and I said I'd think about it, and I said I'd contact him, but then he flipped it and said he'd contact me. So we'll see. Be interesting to see if he actually does contact me and if he does want to sit down for an interview. I'll have to think about it. I haven't made up my mind at this point, but I'm willing to consider it. So that was the interesting thing there. And then we probably had about another half a dozen people turn up at the event who were information gathering for various organisations. There was definitely someone there from Socialist Aotearoa or the left-wing activist community. There were potentially a couple of SIS types on information recce's. Then there was, in my mind, potentially someone there from, how could we put this? The cult, who was probably also just doing a bit of a reconnaissance mission to see what we were saying. And then, you know, there are a few. Oh, there was another guy actually who I denied access to because he turned up, Chinese guy, claiming to have just happened to be at the library, and he saw that there was an event on. I mean, we didn't have any signage out saying what the event was. We had one sign for Mothers Who Stand for Freedom, but we weren't publicly displaying anything. And so he came along and wanted to come in and said, "Oh yeah, I'm just interested in what's happening here." And I said, "Oh, it's a political event. Nobody's interested in politics, are they?" And he was kind of like, "Yeah, no, I'm interested. I'm like, oh, okay, so what are your thoughts on COVID?" And he's like, "Yeah, I'm not really a fan of the lockdowns," and he was trying to, tell me that he was on my side. And I said, "Oh, okay, and so what about Jacinda? What do you think?" And he's like, and then he just kind of didn't really know what to say. And at that point, it became very clear that he was on an information gathering mission for somebody. Don't quite know who, because after David Farrier left, we did hear him on the phone, and it was almost as if, he could have easily just sent somebody else in to try and record the event. And then, funnily enough, because after this event, it was the Patriots on Ponsonby pub crawl with Damien Dement. So then lots of us went from that day event to the evening event, and we were joined by more Patriots. And this Chinese guy was at the pub that we were at. What are the chances? What are the chances? And apparently he was actually confronted by Damien and a few others, but I didn't see that. So he could have been, CCP, or who knows? Who knows who he was working for? So it has been a bit of an exciting weekend in terms of the information war and taking these guys head on, because that's what we have to do. We are the news now. The news organisations are quickly crumbling. And I'd say within 6 months, the whole media landscape will look very, very different. But it's a matter of watch this space at this point. So, all in all, the Patriots on Ponsonby was also an amazing event. So after the Beyond Politics event, where everyone was they didn't want to leave. Nobody wanted to leave the venue, but we were on quite a tight time schedule, so we had to leave. We couldn't stay any longer in the venue, so they were all buzzing. And then we went up to Ponsonby and went to 2 bars, and had an awesome evening. It was great. Everybody had fun, great pizza, great company. Everyone was very peaceful, no issues. The police did do a drive-by in their paddy wagon, slowed right down. It was funny. So it was a great event. No problems. And I don't think I mentioned though, did I, about the previous event during the day that we actually ended up having to get security guards, because the article that Josie Adams initially wrote caused a bit of a stir with the Auckland City Council, and they allegedly had a few official complaints, so they recommended that we get security because in the article also it said that there was a group called the Rabbit Hole Resistance who have sprung up, and they are basically going to expose anybody with counter ideas or counter thoughts to the mainstream, which obviously they label as a conspiracy theory. So watch this space. No doubt they will grow in numbers, and I wouldn't be surprised if they start officially picketing truth telling or truth speaking events where free thinkers gather, because as we know, free thought and freedom of action and freedom of association are all under threat, and that's what the hate speech laws are about. And they really want to silence us, and they really want to silence anyone that has a counter opinion to the mainstream. So that was the little wrap up that I wanted to give, primarily about the weekend's events. I just want to encourage everybody to stay strong, and I think the energy does need to be put towards, well, for me anyway, towards towards just showing the hypocrisy of our media. You know, and they claim to be truth tellers and fair and balanced reporting, and you know, they claim to be investigative journalists, but and yet they don't actually do any investigation. Because I mean, look, I'm a layperson. I'm not a journalist. I'm not someone that's in that industry. And if I can find victims of these things who have put their testimony online, or you know, there's books written about it, they could do it. It's not that hard. But yeah, we all know why, because they have a different master to us, and they choose to sell their soul, basically. And I don't want to sell my soul. At this point in time, I still want to tell the truth, and I hope I never sell my soul. Apparently we've all got a price. Hopefully I never have to make that decision. But yeah, so at this point I'm still very happy to do my podcasts, and yeah, let's see what the mainstream media will do this week, because I actually am just gonna start rebutting what they say. I'm not gonna ignore them anymore, because we need to stand up and fight back. The pen is mightier than the sword, so we still have the freedom to write and speak, and as long as I've got that right, I will use it. So with that, thank you all for watching and listening, and please like, share and subscribe. As always, I thank you for your support, and you can, if you're not on Twitter yet, I really recommend Twitter, and I'm on Facebook, Sarah Smith on Facebook, and Sarah Speaks on Twitter. Sarah19849 is my handle. Yeah, otherwise here on YouTube, Sarah Speaks. So thanks everybody, and you have a good week, and we'll touch base again soon. Take care. Bye now.